course, difficult to sort of relate your own history. But I do my best. In the army, I was in the army for 3.5 years, and the last 3 months of that time, all I did was ski. As in the sort of course, knowing the British Army, as I'd been a hospital worker, they put me in the infantry. And when they discovered that I'd been a hospital worker, a pathology lab, then they transferred me to a hospital in Austria, Army Hospital. And it was there that I sort of got involved in skiing. When I came out, after the usual, what shall I say, post-army, I got a job at the London Clinic in the path lab there. Of course, there were several pathologists. They'd all been in the army. One very entertaining chap, he'd been a prisoner of war, etc., etc. I felt restless, and I said to one of the doctors, I'd like to take up something, after all the activity of skiing, etc., etc., fencing or maybe jiu-jitsu, but I don't know any place that does jiu-jitsu, you see. And he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, "The Budokai." He said, "I am a yellow belt." And he told me about the Budokai. And it was probably the next day or the day after. This was the first week in January 1949. I went down to Lower Grosvenor Place and joined. I probably had passed that place many times because I was born not very far away, and I went to school. The school was about 5 minutes walk away. And I joined. I had private lessons with a fellow called Collie Jacobs. Very, very nice person. And I got on all right, and I can still remember the first time I was thrown. He did a very slow hip throw on me, and I remember the sensation of standing and watching the room revolve around me. It was most odd. And then I realised what had happened, but it was literally the room was sort of revolving around me. I was standing still, you see. And after that, I remember my first practice with an osteopath called Doug Mann, who was an awful judo man, actually. Nice fellow, but not very big and rather ungainly and so on and so forth. And then I remember also going on. Now this is at the old Budokai, 15 Lower Grosvenor Place, just opposite the Palace Mews, Buckingham Palace Mews. And I remember going on with Len Hunt, which at that time didn't mean anything to me. I mean, I was a white belt. I don't know if I was even a white belt. Of course, you get into little groups, and the particular group I was with was Bloss, Wyman, and Graber, all later internationals. And we would go around together, but most of the time, every day we were at the Budokai, Sundays included. No, I'm sure we made a lot of sacrifices, but that's where our interest was. And the interest wasn't in competitions, yes, we went into competitions, but we didn't regard them as all that important. What was important was the gradings, getting better, doing better judo. I also remember it was Good Friday, 1949. And I was at the Budokai. We're always at the Budokai. Good Fridays, New Year's Day, and so on. And I saw a yellow belt there, and I thought, no. I was, let me think. I think I was still ungraded, or I may have been a white belt. And I saw this yellow belt there, and I thought, well, I'll go on with him. And I went on with him. And he threw me terrific ankle sweeps, and I thought, my God, I'll never be as good as this fella, you see. Later, when I got to know him better, we both agreed that the ankle sweeps were the most dreadful hacks possible. And he became a lifelong friend, and this was Raymond Jackson, Jack the cartoonist. His mother was Irish, as my mother was, and his father was a tailor, as my father was a tailor. But we'd go for long walks at the weekend, talking about 15, 20 miles. And I do remember sort of going back to his place, which was at Notting Hill Gate, and cook up some chips and fried eggs and so on. Then gradually I got involved in the higher levels of judo. I was in the European Championships. I can't remember, I had 1 or 2 contests there, didn't do very well. It was my first experience. I was a reserve on the later European Championships. Then I got sent to Japan as part of the British team for the first World Judo Championships. And being very health conscious, I'd given up smoking for about nearly a year and a half before I went to Japan. When I got to Japan, my teammate Alfie Graber was sitting next to me, and I was the next one to go on the mat. I'd by sort of 15,000 Japanese, and he was smoking. And I said, for God's sake, give me a cigarette. And that's how I started smoking again. And I went on, and oh yes, of course, my first opponent was a Cuban, big chap. And on the bus a few days previously, he leant over to me and said, wait till you feel my uchimata, Bowen. It will ruin your matrimonial prospects forever. And that was rather pretty. It was pretty stupid, because he was telling me what he was going to do, you see. And of course he did his uchimata, and I landed him on his back. And that was that, and then I went on with somebody I think was from China, and got past him, and then I came up, we're in the quarterfinals now, and I came up against the champion of France, a beautiful judo man, Henri Courtine. Yes, he tried a left uchimata, which I avoided, and something else. And then I threw him, and it landed on his side. Probably these days I would have got a waza-hari or something, but I didn't worry too much in those days about such things. And he rolled off the mat. I remember Alfie Graber yelling out, Dickie, get on top of him, get on top of him. But I was, I was too inexperienced actually. And he went off the mat and came back on, and we sort of skipped together, and he caught me with a foot sweep, you see, and that was that. Of course, he went out in the next round against one of the Japanese, Yoshimatsu or Natsui, I can't remember which. So that was the... after that, there was also other internationals, goodwill contests they call them, I think. One in Tokyo, one in Kyushu, and one somewhere else, so it was quite a busy time. And after that, I stayed on the idea. I mean, I was a bit old for this sort of game. I was 30 by that time. And I eventually got a Japanese room, which I shared with another English fella. And we go off to the Kodokan. After a while, I got invited to the police dojo. That's the central police dojo. The lowest grade there was 4th Dan. I can't remember when I first went there, I think I was 2nd Dan. So it was an enjoyable time for the 4th Dans, you see. But eventually you get better and you get used to it. That was where there was a big traditional dojo, wooden building, and one end that have the kendo and the other end the judo. The judo, there are about 60, I suppose, and the kendo, probably about the same number. See, each police station in Tokyo had its dojo, the main police stations, that is, and there was an instructor attached to each, generally 4th or 5th Dan, and each morning they collected at the central dojo where they got their instructions from people like Daigo and so on, you see. And but I do remember Graba walking in rather carelessly past the kendo section, and somebody went back with their shinai, their wooden cane, bamboo cane sword, and clunked him by accident. After the keisho, or the cop shop as we used to call it, that was, I think it was from 10 until 11 in the morning. That was the randori, that's what we really went for, you see. Then we'd sort of have a meal or go home and cook something, because we were pretty poverty-stricken in those days. Then to the Kodokan about sort of 5 or 5:30, and practice there. Usually by about 7 it was quietening down, there wasn't much left to do. As a member of the Kenshu, say, this was a special section comprised of, I suppose, about 30 Japanese and a number of foreigners. The 30 Japanese were the top boys from the universities in Tokyo. For example, Inokuma, Kaminaga, Matsushita, Kasabra Watanabe. These are all in the Kenshusei. Our teachers, our permanent teachers, were Daigo, Karamore and Osawa. We were supposed to sign in every day. We didn't have to pay any sort of fees, and in fact people given a little bit of financial help. For example, Graba was given a bit of financial help. It was offered to me, but I was sort of managing okay. On a Saturday afternoon, we had the main dojo of the Kodokan to ourselves, and there were visiting teachers. Every teacher of note in the Tokyo area or roundabout would come along and give an hour session. Two of those sessions were taken by Mufune, who was then the 10th Dan, and also another two by Samura, who was also the other 10th Dan. So we got the highest possible instruction. And after that, the Kodokan would open about 3 o'clock for general practice, and we would finish. And then we'd have to go upstairs, this was at the old Kodokan, and wash out our dressing room, the teacher's dressing room, and their little office. The Japanese tradition, you see. So I've scrubbed floors with the best of them, sat next to Kaminaga and so on. Possibly the hardest thing I did at the Kodokan was being selected for the Kagami Braki. Dennis Bloss had been selected, this was 1958 I think it was. Dennis Bloss had been selected to take the part of Uke in Nagi no Kata. And I remember him hobbling around. He was bleeding from both ankles and from along the side of his thighs and elbows, because you took an awful thumping. There was no lift up in this sort of Nagi no Kata. It was, if they threw you, they completely threw you, you see, smash. And he was shuffling around like an old man, and anyway, he sort of got through it. Because every teacher wanted to see this, had their own little sort of bit. And then my turn came. Karamura came up to me and said, "Dickie, you're going to be Uke and Nagi no Kata, the Kagami Braki, you see." And I remember Daigo collaring me and taking me up into a small dojo, a very small dojo. At one end, there was Watanabe and Leggett was having photographs taken. And Daigo started to teach me how to take Orinagi, and which was very good because he was a big man, and it started off more or less squatting on the floor and built up from then, because it's a pretty violent throw. And we went through it, and then every day that went on with this bloody Nagi no Kata. And more bleeding, more and more bruises. And then on the actual day, again, this was still at the old Kodokan, and everybody gathers, all the Judo people gather for this event. It's a big event, and all the teachers are there. And Osawa grabbed us and they took us up to a dojo, and they said, "Well, I want to see the Nagi no Kata." So off we go, you see. That's 30 throws before the main event. And then Kotani turns up. Now, Kotani, terribly nice person, and I got quite friendly with him, and he was the last 10th Dan. At that time he wasn't a 10th Dan. He wanted to see it. So off. So that's 60 throws before the main event. And so that's pretty nerve-wracking, because a few feet away you've got the president of the Kodokan, you've got 2 10th dans, and every other teacher of note. Anyways, I survived just about. The other, we were the lowest grades there. I can't remember the name of the Japanese fella. But the last 2 events they go through all the kata. The last 2 kata were done by Mifune and by Sabo, so 2 10th dans. So I was in a show where other performers were 10th dans. We also did kata. The president, or what was it, chairman of the Olympic Committee, he turned up, and I put on a little show for him, and I did Kerr and I did Nagano kata for that. Then later, I think the whole committee of the IOC turned up, and again we were sort of called upon to do sort of the Nagano kata, keep the foreigners' end up, more or less, you see. I came back, started teaching at the Budokai and Percy Sakini's place. I was on various committees, the Budokai Technical Committee, the team selection, a coaching committee, and then I got fed up with the most of it and sort of retired from the BJA stuff. But I kept on at the Budokai, so as I said, I became chairman. This was 1968, and I stayed chairman for a term which was 3 years as far as I can remember, and then I retired because I had strong views about chairmanship, that you should do a bit and then quit before you start doing any harm. Although I stayed on the committee, I think it was for another 5 years. It was, incidentally, my second time on the committee. I'd been on the committee before, before I went to Japan. After leaving the committee, I should say, apart from teaching at the Budokai, I also taught at the Percy Sakini's Judokan in Hammersmith, and it was there that I taught Benny Hill for about 2 years. Terribly nice fella. That I also met David Queensbury, the Marquis of Queensbury, who reached brown belt. I'm still in touch with him. Also, another fellow who reached brown belt was Palazzi, or now Sir Eduardo Palazzi. Another one was Lord Balfe. Palmer, who was then chairman and president of the BJA, said, "Would you like to be chairman of the BJA?" And I thought, well, that's rather funny for a democratic thing. And he said, "I'll be behind you." And I thought, no. I said, no. Mm-hmm. And yes, amazing. Right. And then a bit later he said, "Well, would you sort of chair the coaching and technical committee?" Which I did. I said, providing you don't interfere, you see. And that went, I think it was 5 years I was there, and I had a very good committee. George Glass, Richard Barraclough, Stan Brogan, Dave Barnard. I can't remember. Oh, it was Liz Viney. I mean, it was pretty high-powered. And that was the only time that the BJA sort of made any attempt to give some sort of service to the clubs. I set up courses, I think in one year, I think it was 60 free courses, and the idea was to sort of hold courses here and there all over the country and to swap teachers around so that so they got different information, different ideas, you see. And this went very well until it got too much for the BJA, this thing, and they closed it down. We'd started up also a self-defense system aimed primarily at women. And we got involved with Scotland Yard through Stan Brogan. I remember a conference we had, and we started this off, and Brogan went round and taught. And I think we got about 100 qualified teachers. And then the BJA sort of got involved again, and we said, that's it, finish, we quit. So, you know, politicians are a strange lot, actually. We're going back now to 1952 or something like that. There was moves to get a Japanese instructor, eventually turned out to be Kara Moore. Leggett looked around the club and realised that something had to be done to prepare people for Kara Moore, a Japanese system of training. So he started the Sunday classes, put up a notice and said you're invited to attend, invited of course, to attend a Sunday class. I can't remember, it was an hour and a half or something like that. Put your name down. I think 40 people turned up on the first occasion. On the next occasion, I think it was down to about 25. And then finally it levelled out at about sort of 15, 16, because it was very, very hard indeed, and you know, a lot of hard exercises. Of course, we weren't particularly fit. A lot of hard exercises. Teaching, there was always a teaching session, and the idea was that, you're taught, had a session at Hanigoshi. Next Sunday, somebody be picked out and say, right, well, tell us about the session on Hanigoshi. You had to sort of thing. The early morning practice was a must. You had to turn up there. Poor Don Burr, who had bronchiectasis, is it? Who was, he reached international standard. He didn't turn up one morning. He got a telegram from Leggett saying, you're expected, you're a senior member, you're expected to sort of be an example to the others, you see. There was the famous, I was too far, I was up in, it started at 7 o'clock, that's right, 7 until 8. And no heating, all the windows open. Now that is the Judo proper, not like a lot of what goes on these days. And I would stay with Alfie Graber, who lived at West Kensington, because I was too far away. It was up in Kilburn. I couldn't get there in time, you see. And of course, we were young. We'd turn up in the morning, do our session, and then go and have breakfast at the restaurant with Leggett, probably. And then we'd have to turn up in the evening and do a session. And of course, we'd sort of talk and yak and yak and yak. And it'd probably be about 1 o'clock before we went to bed, just. So get up the next morning, we're exhausted. We had 3 alarm clocks. And one morning, Alfie, who was Austrian actually, very excitable, he said, Dickie, Dickie, Dickie. He said, we've overslept. He said, it was too late to do anything. And he said, oh, well, to hell with it. They said, let's go to sleep again. And so we went to sleep. And then the doorbell rang. He said, Dickie, Dickie, it's Trevor, it's Trevor. And Alfie's mother let him in, and he came in and he said, well, some of us can manage and others can't, you know. But, you know, you try. He was very sort of sarcastic. And they said, well, get dressed and we'll go and have breakfast. But I always remember, he said, Dickie, Dickie, it's Trevor, it's Trevor. Well, there's lots of little stories which I could relate, but that's probably enough to shock anybody.